In the scorching desert sands, where the wind whispers untold stories, there lies a woman forgotten by the tides of time, Reumah, the concubine of Nahor. Have you ever wondered how women in the Bible, mentioned only in passing, lived with such fierce faith? Reumah was no princess or queen, yet her story is a testament to quiet grace and courage. A mother, a wife, facing injustice and sacrifice for her family. Her journey will touch your heart. Join us to explore this emotionally charged spiritual odyssey where divine justice shines through. Subscribe to the channel to uncover more untold stories. Let faith guide you and step into Reumah's world. Yet Reumah's deep brown eyes always glimmered with an indescribable light. Faith in the Creator, a faith strong enough to warm the frigid desert nights, steadfast enough to uplift her soul when scorned. The small fire in her goatskin tent burned brightly each night, not just from the crackling dry wood, but from the warm prayers Reumah poured into the hearts of her 4 sons, Teba, handsome and strong, Gaham, calm and steady, Tehash, vibrant and spirited, and Ma'aka, sharp and quick. Those names, like precious stones set in the genealogical line, were recorded in the Bible. Yet few in later generations knew whose hands had cradled those lives in the darkness, teaching them to fear God with whispers gentler than the wind, brushing the tent's flaps. Haran in those days was a strategic trade hub between the fertile lands of Mesopotamia and the northern Syrian oases. Camel caravans moved like rivers of sand, carrying frankincense from the south, turquoise from the east, and rare Tyrian purple cloth. But prosperity was fragile. A well could spark a tribal war. A sandstorm could erase a pilgrim's tracks. Nomadic tribes camping along the Euphrates eyed each other more through sword blades than smiles. Amid this brittle peace, Nahor, wealthy, shrewd but stern, built his reputation through the estate of his primary wife, Milcah, whose political ties and prestigious heirs bolstered his standing. In his ironclad presence, Reumah existed only as a low shrub beneath a towering oak, her presence optional, her absence unnoticed. Each evening as the sunset painted the western mountains red, the sound of a ram's horn calling for prayer drifted from Milcah's tent. Reumah would gently lift the sheep's wool curtain, just enough for her sons to glimpse the flickering oil lamp before the makeshift tabernacle. She taught them to distinguish hollow pride from the nobility of compassion, that those who trust in God see suffering as mere wind retreating before a lighthouse's beam. Those whispered lessons sowed seeds of courage, so that one day, in her son's eyes, the world would be measured not by status, but by the love that nurtured them. Rumors, like gold dust in a desert storm, spread swiftly through campfire circles. One new moon night, as the Euphrates reflected a silver crescent, Reumah overheard the casual voice of a tent guard. Nahor planned a new trade route stretching to the northern frontier where the Habiru tribes guarded copper-rich gorges. And in that tense gambit, her 4 sons' names were proposed to lead the vanguard. Everyone knew the route was a double-edged sword. Success would fill Nahor's granaries. Failure would stain the sands with the blood of nameless pioneers. Reumah stood silent under a sky heavy with pine resin and campfire smoke, the beat of goatskin drums pulsing in her chest. She closed her eyes, letting the night wind dry the sweat streaking her temples. The world beyond was vast, teeming with camels and spice roots, but riddled with traps to swallow young, untested hearts. Reumah bit her lip, tasting the salt of unshed tears, the tang of fear swallowed mute. Back in her narrow tent, lined with shaggy sheepskins and hung with simple clay jars, she lit an oil lamp, its glow catching her sun-darkened face in the fire's reflection. The flickering light cast shifting shapes on the walls, like the distant mountain ridges her sons would soon tread. Amid light and shadow, Reumah sorted barley sacks, counted dry grains, and checked the seams of water skins. Small acts brimming with great resolve. If her sons must go, she would send them off with meticulous preparation, faith deep as ancient wells, and warm memories to carry, like talismans against the desert's cold nights. Not all born in darkness consent to stay there forever. Reumah knew the limits of a concubine in a harsh patriarchal society, knew her voice would drown amid the prioritized interests of Milcah's house. Yet her fierce desire to protect the 4 lives born beneath her heart burned hotter than any fear of judgment. That long night, as the desert rooster's crow rose from the horizon, Reumah placed a hand on her thin chest, feeling her heart beat like a bronze drum, and silently prayed, "Lord, grant me wisdom to be a shield, courage to be a sword, to guard my sons from cruel winds." The next morning, dawn sunlight burst forth, bathing the valley in honeyed hues. Reumah tidied her tent just enough to serve as a refuge for her weary spirit after a day of teaching her sons. From afar, the sharp clang of hammers forging metal set a frantic rhythm. Nahor was busy building bridges over marshes, recruiting guards for the caravan, and, of course, calculating profits from yet-to-be-sealed resin barrels. To him, the risk to Reumah's sons was a mere number, offset by trade goods. She knew this, and that knowledge straightened her spine, made her steps firmer, though her bare feet burned on the sandy gravel. As the sun climbed, thinning the morning mist, its light blazed on Reumah's tent, as if reminding her that her only anchor was faith. With each inhale, she kindled a spark of hope. With each exhale, she released a fear. The journey to protect her sons would be long and thorny, but its core had taken shape. This fragment, buried in history's vast tapestry, would not be dyed with despair. On the final night before rumors solidified into orders etched on a contract, Reumah stepped into an open patch where moonlight spread a trembling silver veil over the sand. The night wind carried the scent of dry grass and the crackle of fires from a new merchant camp at the oasis's edge. She opened her arms, letting the breeze slip through her fingers, imagining 4 small flames, Teba, Gaham, Tehash Maka, burning brightly atop distant tent poles. Darkness loomed like a great beast, but Reumah smiled faintly. Those who carry light in their hearts fear no deep night. That nameless mother under a star-crowded sky sowed courage into a generation's heart, each seed destined to grow into warriors of peace. Thus, in that sun-scorched, arid valley, a story that seemed a mere footnote in scripture took root, awaiting the day it would sprout green in the desert. And soon Reumah's seeds of faith would face the sandstorms, proving that sometimes history turns not on regal kings, but on an ordinary mother who dared to love to the very end. Before her prayers could fade, a searing red light pierced Reumah's closed eyelids. A vision flared as if someone had unshuttered a forge in the desert. 4 crimson torches stood upright on silver sand, blazing with a light almost alive, illuminating swirling dust clouds around them. But the heartwarming glow didn't last. The night seemed to crack open, spewing a massive shadow lunging to devour all 4 flames. Reumah shuddered. Her heart pounded like goatskin drums, frantically signaling a straying camel herd. The vision vanished instantly, restoring the taut, silent darkness, yet its heat lingered on her skin, her hands trembling despite the cold night. In that moment, Reumah needed no explanation. The 4 torches were her 4 flesh and blood sons, and the encroaching darkness was a harbinger of calamity. Fear choked her throat, but a sacred stream poured into her soul, reminding her those warned are also those called to prepare. She forced herself to stand, hand on her chest, feeling her heart's drum beat. The dread for her sons surged like a flood, breaching its banks, but within that deluge, a steadfast rock emerged. Unyielding faith, dawn was yet to break, but Heron's camp shattered sleep with a piercing ram's horn. The long hoarse blast cut through the mountain peaks, echoing off red clay hills, signaling an urgent meeting. Reumah wrapped her shawl tightly, stepping out to see the main tent aglow with the torches, sharp debates mingling with the hurried footsteps of servants herding camels to their pens. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and scorched wool, a sign that decisions made in this meeting would tilt toward action, leaving no room for hesitation. As all gathered in a semicircle before the main tent's threshold, Nahor appeared, draped in a black goatskin cloak edged with silver thread. Behind him, Milcah stood erect, her face serene, as if she'd rehearsed the script. Nahor's voice boomed, each word striking like a hammer on stone. The northern trade route must open by the next moon. To seize control, the family would send a vanguard. The air barely stirred until he named them: Teba, Gehem, Tehesh, Maacah. Reumah felt every dust mote around her freeze, suspended in midair. Her 4 sons were too young. Their swords were barely sharpened, their ambitions tender as green shoots in a hot wind. But in Nahor's structure of gain, they were fit to be a trial shield, while Milcah's sons stayed in Haran to hold the rear. Reumah's eyes blurred, not with tears but with a sudden vertigo squeezing her chest. A mother fears disaster once, but injustice tenfold. Helplessness surged from her bones, racing up her neck. She had no right to protest, no power to pull her 4 boys from the orbit of Nahor's decree. As the meeting dispersed, the dust underfoot still unsettled, Reumah slipped through the rows of camels to the tethering ground at the camp's edge. There, Teba was stroking the mane of a red camel, his eyes glinting with a mix of eagerness and unnamed fear. Reumah placed her thin but firm hand on his, her fingers trembling, not from weakness, but from emotions she fought to contain. She whispered, soft enough for the wind to carry away, "Keep your faith. Carry what your mother has prepared." The brief words closed, letting silence settle over them like still water at night. In that quiet, Reumah heard echoes of Abraham's story. He left with raw faith alone. No map, no ledger of prophets, only an unseen promise. That faith had carved his steps in the wild sands, and miracles never forsook those who dared to walk. After squeezing their son's hand, Reumah turned, walking back to her tent, each step stirring faint dust like ash. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the hills, but a plan blazed in her mind. Fear tightened her heart, but injustice burned fiercer, forcing her to think beyond a concubine's confines. She recalled the 4 torches. They flickered only when darkness loomed. If darkness could be held at bay, the flames would rise. With that, Reumah inhaled deeply, her nose stinging from lingering night sand. In the vast emptiness, she tilted her head to the sky. Its pale indigo hinted at a dawn that arrived despite the nightmare just sown. In a mother's heart, a seed of courage cracked its shell, her soul flooding with resolve, like a river bursting its banks when snow melts. She would not let her 4 torches gutter in a sandstorm. The journey ahead promised countless perils. Enemy tribe spears, desert night frost, and ambition veiled in diplomatic smiles. But Reumah believed every arduous path held a crack for grace to slip through, if one had the courage to seek it. That night, before the warehouse keepers bolted the crystal doors guarding fragrant resins, Reumah added oil to her lamp. The small flames flicker cast her shadow on the wall, transforming it into a warrior in coarse cloth, wielding an invisible shield woven from prayer. She spread a wool mat, kneeling once more, but unlike the midnight panic, this was a silent plea for God to forge her heart into steel. She knew tomorrow and the days after, every gesture, word, even breath, must become armor for her sons. Outside the tent, the wind shifted, carrying pine resin, rustling the canvas with soft flaps. The new moon peeked past the tent's edge like a divine eye watching. Its light spilled onto the sand, encircling Reumah's form in a faint halo. In that fragile communion between dying night and dawning day, the nameless mother vowed she would hang her heart on hope's flagpole, defying tempest despite her lowly status. The conflict's canvas had its outlines drawn. At the center, 4 tender torches about to step into the desert. On the edges, dark powers and ambitions lurking. And in a hidden corner, Reumah, a fragment deemed unremarkable, quietly sharpening her inner weapons. As the new day's sun poured fire over the dunes, launching a chain of events, her nocturnal vow was etched into time's stone. Miracles come only to those who refuse to falter. And Reumah, with no throne or crown, resolved to yield not an inch to the raging waves. Material wealth was but the surface. Reumah knew she needed a trusted intermediary to spread her pledge. In the early morning, still shimmering with dew, she sought the makeshift market where the first rays of sun pierced the woolen canopy, casting golden flecks on sparse grass. Miriam, a nomadic merchant once saved by Reumah during a sandstorm, stood counting sacks of pistachios on her camel's back. Reumah placed a hand on her heart in greeting. No words wasted. Their eyes alone rekindled the bond of old gratitude. Miriam nodded, signaling her servants to bring 4 large water skins sealed with beeswax and a sack of wheat seeds gleaming like summer sun. In the desert, water was worth more than gold, seeds more than swords. Reumah knew she had laid the foundation for a language of peace, yet the gifts of goodwill lacked one beat: a white flag. In a world where spears spoke first, a white cloth on a bamboo pole was the strongest tongue, for it demanded its bearer bear the courage to leave violence behind. Reumah understood the only one with authority to grant such a flag was Nahor, the patriarch who saw her as a mere shadow. All day she weighed her approach, honing each thought like a smith sharpening a blade on wet stone, precise enough to cut but not wound the listener. As the second night draped its indigo veil, stars yet to twinkle, but the wind already drying the sweat on her brow, Reumah tugged the cord of the main tent. Flickering torchlight cast her form onto the canvas, stretching into a tall, trembling shadow. She heard her heartbeat, slow urging, and felt fear ebb like waves retreating from the shore. Stepping over the threshold, she inhaled the scent of pine resin mixed with scorched wool and began. She didn't open with a plea. She spoke a warning. If Nahor's blood spilled on the frontier sands, the sands would repay in kind. But if they offered water, water would sprout life. Her words were simple, yet each sentence fell like a silk-wrapped arrow, piercing the veiled disdain in Nahor's eyes, causing a fleeting tremor. Reumah didn't stop at philosophy. She shared her vision of 4 red torches, declaring it a message from God for their lineage. A torch lit with the oil of peace multiplies light, but one fueled by hatred withers in a sandstorm. Nahor sat silent. Outside, camel reins clinked, as if urging that the hour of decision couldn't wait. Finally, he nodded, agreeing to let her sons carry the white flag, but with a condition sharp as a cold blade. If the journey failed, Reumah and her sons would leave the camp empty-handed, stripped of any claim to past blessings. Reumah closed her eyes for a beat, accepting without haggling. She knew well that some shoulders were born to bear sacrifice, not barter for favor. The next 3 days passed like a desert shower, brief but leaving deep marks on the earth. Reumah rose before dawn, donning a dust-brown cloak, beginning her silent training. She taught her 4 sons to wield their gazes like swords, direct but not defiant, measured but not weak. She drilled them to bow deeply enough to show respect, but keep their spines straight, so when they rose, their dignity remained unbroken. They rehearsed in the dawn's red glow until the motions became as instinctive as their heartbeats. At midday, Reumah sat under a withered willow by a stream, patiently stitching threads into clay-colored cloth. She embroidered the early Christian fish symbol, a subtle sign of faith, onto their shoulder bags. Faint blue threads stood out on the earthy fabric, so small that outsiders might miss it, but to her, it was a code between man and God. I am with you on thorny paths. The bags would hug her son's chest like amulets of peace. By night, the bleating of sheep echoed from the hills, mingling with the halting notes of a shepherd's wooden flute. Reumah sat by the glowing embers, placing a hand on each son's head, reciting a prayer. May God spread wings of shelter. May foes see peace in their eyes. May sandstorms turn to rain for the thirsty. The words were quiet but stirred an indescribable energy in the air, like an underground stream seeping through gravel, stubbornly nourishing roots in a drought. Sometimes strength arrives not with thunder's roar, but grows steadily through a mother's midnight whispers. Faith had turned to action. Action wove an invisible but real web, from Miriam's water to Nahor's white flag to bows that broke the glint of spears. Every link meshed unseen. Reumah envisioned the northern sand road as a chasm split wide. She had cast a net of hope across to the far bank, awaiting anchors of trust to hold firm. Her heart never ceased its nervous beat, but the initial fear had transformed into a blue flame under the hearth, warming without consuming. On the final evening before departure, Heron's camp blazed with firelight. Bronze drums thundered for the send-off ceremony. Reumah, in a thin woven shawl, stood beside her 4 sons, feeling their shoulders firmer after just 3 days. She shed no tears, for tears now belonged to the inner moment God had witnessed. She only pressed her palm to each son's chest over the faint blue fish, pushing gently, as if sealing a blessing. Under a star-filled sky, she whispered a final word, not for her sons, but for the wind. Peace followed them to their return. From afar, Nahor raised a date wine goblet, proclaiming a vow of honor. If the trade route revived commerce, Reumah's line would be recorded beside Milcah's in the family ledger. To outsiders, it was a dry pact. To Reumah, it was the final line between a slave's fate and the freedom to shape a future. As cheers faded, the sky deepened to charcoal purple, embers on the sand glowing like countless divine eyes. Reumah sank beside the well, peering into its dark water, seeing her trembling but defiant reflection. She realized the journey from fear to action bore the face of grace. God often sent perilous riddles so humans could write answers with their faith. And in that moment, she believed her net of hope had reached the chasm's far side. Come morning, whether the dawn of sun or miracle, everything she'd prepared would become the arm saving the 4 torches her vision had forewarned. The desert rooster crowed at midnight. Reumah rose, carrying the dew on her hem and a quiet smile. Tomorrow would come, as it always had in the history of those who dared to believe. But one thing was poised to change. The white flag this time was not a symbol of surrender, but a testament to courage, proof that a nameless concubine's heart could negotiate with an entire desert. When that heart brimmed with a never-drying stream of grace. Each camel bore a taunt buffalo hide water skin slung at its side. Under the dawn's glow, they reflected the last dewdrops as twinkling flashes, tiny lighthouses wrapping fragile hope in the form of desert wine sacks. On each skin strap, a young olive sprig was carefully tied, its silver leaves shimmering with dew, quivering as the wind passed, like green fingers of peace waving to the drought. Amid the resounding horns of farewell, Reumah whispered a phrase too soft to fully form. Go in grace. The desert, however, rarely stays gentle when humans stake all on hope. Less than half a day's journey out, the sky turned ashen lead. The horizon blurred, then erupted into dark bronze clouds of dust. A sandstorm formed abruptly, like a lion's jaws gaping to swallow the sky. Winds howled, slicing through the temporary tent's canvas, making poles shudder violently. Ahead of the merchant caravan from the storm's heart, the thud of hooves echoed. Northern tribe cavalry, clad in dark leather armor, emerged in a crescent formation, their shouts blending with the wind, sounding more beast than human. Teba, Reumah's eldest, sweat mixed with sand, but his mother's words flared in his memory. Before violence, raise a tent, not a spear. He shouted urgently, ordering a makeshift shelter of light wooden stakes, hoisting a white cloth already dusted brown. In that same instant, he commanded all to lower weapons, laying sword blades flat in the hot sand, hands cupping waterskins raised to shoulder height. The coordinated move, swift as a familiar dance, made the cavalry ahead halt, swords in hand but eyes wavering. For in the desert's unwritten code, lowering arms before a storm showed trust in both heaven and man. As if affirming that trust, the sky split with a shimmering green lightning bolt, thunder roaring from an unseen void. Then a freak rain poured down, heavy drops like pearls pounding the sand. The raging sandstorm was quenched, suspended grain sinking as if a curse turned to dust. The parched desert had never been more grateful for rain than in that moment. The gray earth turned rich chocolate, the scent of wet soil rising sweet like fresh-baked bread. The northern tribesmen, believing rare rain was a divine voice, lowered their shields. Their leader, a scar slashing his right cheek, dismounted slowly. He scooped rainwater in his palm, looked at Teba, and his once fiery gaze melted into barely concealed respect. Teba stepped forward, cautious but calm, offering the buffalo hide water skin and a sack of barley. He needed few words. The gift spoke his desire for alliance, as the olive sprig stood in for a peace letter. In the rain, water trickled gently from the skin's mouth, mingling with barley grains pattering into the leader's hand. 3 symbols, rain, olive, barley, suddenly wove a bond stronger than any oath. Whether riding horses or leading camels in the desert, all knew survival hinged on water and food. Sharing life's essentials meant dismantling walls of blood. The leader raised a hand, halting his troops, signaling swords back to sheaths. With Teba, he dug a small hollow in the waterlogged sand, pouring half the water skin into an impromptu peace well, sprinkling barley at its rim. All bowed, only the patter of rain and the desert sigh of quenched thirst sounded. In that moment, the enemy's sword broke silently in their minds, not under force. In Haran, Reumah was grinding millet for the sheep when a thunderclap shook the ground. She looked up, feeling it pulse in her chest like a distant drum. Instinct told her that on the horizon, her sons had crossed a line between life and death. Rain fell in the rare way it pauses in the southern desert, drumming on the goatskin tent. Streaming through old stitches, Reumah dropped her pestle, sinking to her knees on the wet earth, hands on her heart, eyes softly shut. Each raindrop on her hair was an answering echo. Faith had not faltered. When the orange sun returned, the sandstorm had been swept to the western sky. Only the scent of clean earth and the songs of small birds hunting worms remained. 2 days later, as dawn's mist still clung to the dunes, the caravan returned through the camp's gate, their camels glowing violet pink in the early light. They bore no bloodied spoils, but a thick sheepskin etched with a peace treaty, brown charred script carved deep like autumn leaf veins pressed in an ancient book. Atop the scroll, a dried olive sprig exhaled the scent of fresh resin, proof the pact was not just inked on hide, but blossomed in the great desert. Nahor, the man who once saw Reumah's vitality as mere tent fire, watched her 4 sons dismount unharmed and fell still. For a moment, his desert-hardened authority seemed to crack. He bowed, slightly, but enough for time's dust to fall from his proud shoulders. That gesture, the first acknowledgement, was either born of the treaty's profit or something deeper. Respect for a mother's love that turned history's wheel. Cheers erupted across Haran. Servants tossed handfuls of roasted millet like tiny fireworks. Shepherd boys whistled. Women filled buckets from the well's fresh flow, each hall ringing with clear metallic notes. Reumah's sons embraced her in the courtyard, the sweat of their journey mingling with the myrrh she'd applied the night before, creating a unique scent. Victory without steel, only grace and resolve. Reumah tightened her embrace, feeling their shoulders stronger, her own heart easing. The summer sky soared high, sunlight weaving a golden carpet. But in her soul, the purest light was the thought. Grace had bent the enemy's sword without breaking anyone's spirit. That night, as the camp sank into sleep after the feast, Reumah stepped from her tent. Above, stars glittered thick as sand, the night wind carrying the scent of fresh, damp earth. She looked north, where the sandstorm had swallowed the sky, where unexpected rain had worked a miracle. Then she raised her head, silently thanking the Most High, no longer with a supplicant's tremble, but with the bearing of a witness. Faith, tempered by sacrifice, shines like the morning star, guiding even those who once denied it. From that moment, Reumah's story was no longer Heron's alone. It became a folded letter sent to all, especially American audiences, reminding them that a mother's heart, forged in faith, can shift a desert into a field of barley. A few familiar steps away, yet feeling like a lifetime apart, Nahor approached, his gait heavy with age and the weight of a newfound truth. Power didn't always lie in a clenched fist or a primary lineage. Under a blazing red sunset, he bowed, low enough for the desert wind to sweep through his salt and pepper hair. The gesture was not just a clumsy apology, but an acknowledgement of the gentle strength of courage nurtured by faith. When he rose, his eyes no longer held the command of a patriarch, but those of a man who'd realized his family's glory sprouted not from the stone of power, but from the heart of a silent mother. The last embers of the camp's fire cast broken rays across Reumah's face, yet she sought no place under the torch of acclaim. Naturally, in the gentle breeze, Heron's women gathered around her, their eyes brighter than any lamp as they whispered, calling her the Mother of Peace. They saw in her the roots of a dream of tranquility they'd thought lived only in the elders' nighttime tales. Shepherd boys in the distance began humming a new tune, scattering Reumah's name on the sand like seeds on a barley field. Little girls skipped around the well, tying young olive sprigs in their hair, chattering about the woman who made clouds pour rain and heavy swords light as grass. Reumah gazed at the sky, now deep blue and speckled with early season stars, a rare calm echoing within her. She understood that the power of grace never needed trumpets, for the steadfast silence of faith spoke louder than all. Sand stirred under her hem, but the wind also carried news of victory across valleys longer than any camel route. In simple acts, embracing her sons, bowing in greeting, smiling through dust, Reumah etched an invisible legacy into Heron's air. Action must pair with wisdom, faith with steadfastness, and true courage was daring to believe when others doubted. Night fell, the campfires dimming, leaving only a red glow on the goatskin tents. Reumah sat alone, fingers tracing the blue thread of the fish embroidered on Teba's shoulder bag, listening to her son's steady breaths behind the curtain. All her life, she'd never sought a name in epic chronicles or demanded a jeweled frame for triumph. Her sole desire was peace lasting long enough for children to grow under windproof tents, deep enough for hands to touch instead of swords. Now, watching the blue stitches catch the firelight, she knew that dream was no longer a luxury. Her own experience taught her, a mother's love, poured into face mold, could bend an enemy's steel without breaking a single hair of her child. Reumah's story, crossing desert barriers in Heron's wooden frames, has reached us, modern audiences often too busy to hear our own breaths. In a world where injustice can headline each morning's news, her counsel falls like unseasonal rain. Choose wisdom over violence, courage over fear. Divine justice doesn't arrive with shouts, but through persistent hands clearing paths, through hearts enduring to understand giving and receiving. If you ever feel small before society's vast machine, remember Reumah was once nameless, tucked behind a curtain, yet still shone. And that shine wasn't a dazzling halo blinding the masses. It was gentle, like embers banked under ash, warm enough for long nights, stubborn enough to burn through sandstorms. When a titleless woman could bend hatred with buffalo hide waterskin and an olive sprig, each of us can tip justice's scales with simple acts. A kind word to the weak, patience with difference, or even silence timed to let a storm pass. Before the oil lamp flickered out, Reumah looked skyward again. Night insects sang an endless lullaby. The distant mountains stood silent, as if listening to her thanks. She believed an ancient promise was unfolding. Those who sow faith reap peace. Those who tame violence with mercy will see their grow in a promised land. She smiled faintly, knowing her name might not grace stone tablets, but souls who witnessed this day of peace would retell it until the last raindrop fell on humanity's final desert. So as the last flame died, Reumah's story, from a faint concubine shadow to a beacon of peace, awaits your sharing. If you've just trudged through a seemingly meaningless day, let her journey kindle a spark in your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, joining us weekly to open new doors to untold journeys, silent lessons that shake us more than 1,000 fireworks. A brief comment from you could be the next olive sprig, extending hope's web from Heron to America's boulevards. Share this video to let Reumah's quiet light spread, touching every soul quietly fighting for their place in the world.